really embarked upon when we decided to come into a physical body and experience life on the earth plane. So in my opinion, we're all heroes. And this is the big journey, but within the big journey of coming to life, there's a lot of other little journeys that we encounter along the way. And that's what tonight's about. And our basic nature is to grow and evolve. And so we each have our own unique plan for unfoldment for our life. And for each person, it's completely different. And so I think you're going to hopefully resonate with some of the different steps that we take along the way. And we all have a choice of whether we're going to answer the call to the journey or not. So I wanted to start by sharing a Zen parable with you about an oak tree. And they say that an oak tree is actually brought into creation by two forces at the same time. There's the acorn from which it all begins, the seed with which all calls the promise and potential, which grows within the tree. Everybody can see that, but only a few can recognize that there is another force operating here as well, the future tree itself, which wants so badly to exist that it pulls the acorn into being, drawing the seedling forth with longing out of the void, guiding the evolution from nothingness to maturity. In this respect, the Zen say it is the oak tree itself that creates the very acorn that, from which it was born. So in other words, we're already this full oak tree, and we are moving towards that existence all the time. And I love that. That was actually popularized by Elizabeth Gilbert in Eat, Pray, Love. If you read that book, you'd recognize it. Okay, so let's start out on the journey, and there's going to be 12 steps along the way. And I use the parable or the comparison to the Lord of the Rings when Frodo sets out on his journey and leaves the Shire. So step one is we're in the comfort zone, or what I call the status quo, okay? And we all like to live in that comfortable spot. And this was the Shire for Frodo, right? He was comfortable there. He had all his friends, the life that he knew. But within him, he sensed that there was something that he needed to create. And we are all creative beings, and at various times throughout our life, we have this feeling or this urge that we're here to create something. And in astrology, it's when you have several planets that combine together, it intensifies the energy, and that person has this burning desire to create something, to do something. And we experience that many times throughout our life. And that is really the step one, is listening to that urge to create that comes from within. And that is also, in spiritual terms, we refer to that as the Kundalini energy, right? It begins at puberty, and we begin to experience that as more sexual energy, and then as we mature, we begin to experience it more as the energy to create something. And then when that energy gets aroused enough, the next step is the call to adventure. And this is one of the most important steps on the journey, because we have a choice here. We receive that nudge many times throughout our life to become this hero that we were here to become. And we experience this energy within us pushing to grow, almost like an aggravation or a little irritation with this call. And I want you to think about the last time that you felt an inner feeling to go on an adventure, when a door was open to you in some way. And did you listen to those urgings? Did you open the door? Did you take the adventure, or did you turn it down? A lot of times if we turn down that message, that call to adventure, the message gets stronger until we're hit like with a 2x4. We've all heard that funny expression, right? I need to be hit by a 2x4 to get it, right? The universe has been showing me the signs to adventure. Am I answering it? And so the reason step two is so important is because at this point, we're called to an adventure, but we have no idea how the journey is going to turn out. We have no idea what dangers we're going to meet along the way. And so in order to be brave enough to answer this call to adventure, we have to be able to embrace ambiguity, which is the not knowing, right? And most of us have trouble with this because we want to know what's going to happen next. Well, if I jump off the diving board, is there going to be water there? What's the next step if I take this one? But the universe doesn't always tell us what that is. And so we have to be able to live in ambiguity, and that requires faith. and trust that your inner voice is guiding you, that the universe is opening the door to some adventure for a reason. And so I want you to think right now in your own mind, how comfortable are you with ambiguity? So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most comfortable, how comfortable do you feel doing something when you have no idea what the outcome is going to be? That often answers whether we will go on the adventure or not. So in this step 2, we are called to move out of our comfort zone. And I have a friend who used to tell me that, jokingly sometimes, that he loved his ruts deep and wide. And to understand how we can get stuck in our comfort zones, I wanted to share a little about astrology. And the biggest comfort zone is our moon sign on our astrology charts, because the moon reveals where we've been in past lives. So it's where we feel comfortable, where we feel safe, and where we'd really just like to hang out 24/7 is everything related to that moon sign. And so certain moon signs have an easier time getting out of the comfort zone than others. So if you know what your moon is in astrology, you can follow this, or after the class, you can go look up your chart and see what sign is your moon in to understand how you react to the call to adventure. So the first sign are air signs. That's Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And people whose moon sign is in air, they'll probably analyze the call to adventure. And they'll think about it a long time without a lot of emotion. It won't be a very, oh my gosh, I'm scared or crying. It's more, does this seem like a good idea? They intellectualize it. And then they may arrive at a yes. Now, a water moon has the most difficulty responding to the call to adventure, because water signs, that's Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, like comfort and have a deep need for security. And water signs typically need a little bigger nudge to go out and answer that call to adventure, right? And very hesitant. And mainly water signs want to know, is it going to be safe if I venture out? Okay? And then we have earth signs. That's Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. If you have your moon in one of those signs, it's a very practical sign. And so you're going to answer that call to adventure if you feel it's practical. You'll say, is this going to help me in my life? Is it going to further me? Will I be able to continue my work routines, or is it going to get in the way too much of my daily habits and routines? Because earth, moon, earth signs love to have their routines. And so as long as that won't get too upset and it's a practical move, they'll take the call to adventure. And then the signs that have the easiest time taking the call to adventure are fire signs. That's Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Is your moon in one of those signs? Because if it is, when the door opens, you just jump right in. Fire signs can't wait for the next adventure. They don't care if it's practical. In fact, they prefer it not to be practical. They love freedom. And so for them, the call to adventure is a way to step out of their ordinary, boring lives and do something different. Sometimes they jump too quick, and maybe it wasn't the right time. But they definitely will do that. So we can think about Lord of the Rings and Frodo, and what was his moon sign? Did he jump at the open door or not? All right. So how do we pull ourselves out of these comfort zones? Now that you know your moon sign, or tonight you can look it up on your chart, there is a way out. So if you have an air sign moon, you need to maybe bring some books along, because air signs love to learn. So they want a map and they want some books. And they're like, okay, if this is going to be a learning journey, I'll do it. So an air sign, just, bring your notebook and your books. If you're an earth sign, you'll bring your yoga mat, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to do my yoga every morning and keep my routines up on this journey so I'll feel somewhat organized, okay? Fire signs don't need any reassurance. They don't really need to bring anything along. But what about a water sign? So water signs need emotional support. So they may say, I'm not going on this journey unless somebody comes with me. In the example of Lord of the Rings, Frodo took Sam. Remember, his friend Sam came and said, I'll go with you. And so water signs definitely need somebody to accompany them along the journey. Frodo was scared to leave the Shire, right? And he needed assistance. He wanted to know that it was safe. And here's the interesting thing that I want to share with you is that really the safest thing that you can ever do is follow your heart and take the call to adventure. It seems contradictory, right? But if that message is coming from the universe and your higher self, following that is the safest thing. What's not safe to do is follow the status quo and stay in your comfort zone, because we're not here to be comfortable, we're here to grow. So it's actually safer to go out of your home, out of the Shire, out of that comfort zone, and follow your heart. You'll never go wrong. So I remember an author said this once, and I thought it was the coolest thing, that, yeah, listening to your heart's the safest thing you can do. Does it always seem logical, practical? No, it doesn't. But it is safe if you look at it from that perspective. Okay, so now we're on to step 3. This is when the universe provides assistance. And the universe can send us helpers in many forms. The hero is going to need assistance along the journey. So one thing that you can be assured of is that in some way, shape, or form, you will receive assistance along the way. For example, Sam had his friend, or Frodo had his friend Sam come with him. And God always sends us help, doesn't he? So I'm going to tell you, and you maybe heard this drowning man parable, about a funny story about help. So this man was stuck on his rooftop in a flood, and he was praying to God for help. So soon a man in a rowboat came by, and the fellow shouted to the man, "Jump in, I can save you." The stranded fellow looked back and said, "No, it's okay, I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me." So the rowboat moved on. And then a motorboat came by, and the fellow in the motorboat shouted, "Jump in, I can save you." To this, the stranded man said, "No, thanks, I'm praying to God, and I'm sure he's going to save me. I have faith." So the motorboat went on. Then finally, a helicopter shows up, came by, and the pilot shouted down, "Grab this rope, and I'll pull you up to safety." To this, the stranded man again replied, "No, thanks, I'm praying to God. I'm going to be saved soon." So the helicopter went away. Soon the water began rising above the rooftop, and the man drowned. He went up to heaven, and he finally got his chance to discuss this whole disaster with God, at which point he exclaimed, "I had faith in you, but you didn't save me. You let me down. I don't understand why." And God replied, "I sent you a rowboat, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more did you expect?" Right? So in step 3, we have to be aware of the assistance that sometimes is right under our nose, but we don't see it. Okay, so now we are ready for the departure. And now that we've got our assistance, it's time to leave that comfort zone of the ordinary world that we're used to out into the unknown. And it's a turning point in the journey where we can't go back to where we came from. And we often then encounter harsh confrontation with the world, which is meant to force us to take action. So we're all going to face a crisis situation. We never said it was going to be a bed of roses when we opened that door to the call to adventure. And we really have 3 different ways that we respond to crises. Most people will fall into one of these 3 categories. And as I read them, I want you to think about, how do you respond to a crisis? And the first way is completely ignore it. We may try to escape the tension or the crisis. We might take drugs. We might take alcohol. We might sleep ourselves into forgetting. We might numb ourselves with our work. We might become a workaholic. But if we ignore it, it's only going to go stronger. And ignoring it actually does take quite a bit of energy to push it down. The second type of response to the crisis is that we make a temporary change so that the pain will go away or the scariness. And then when things settle down, it's like, dodge that bullet, right? We go back to the former ways. Okay, we've averted the crisis, the tension's gone, and it's really easy to step back into the old way. That's the temporary change. And the third type of response to crisis is that we make a permanent change. Whatever we encounter along the journey changes us and transforms us, and we become a different person. And we completely transform ourselves, and we don't go back to the old way of being. And that, of course, is the most productive way to deal with crisis, because that means we're not going to have to encounter that same lesson or crisis again, because we've encountered it, we mastered it, now we're ready to move on. So think about how you respond to crisis, the most recent one that you had. And in step 4 in the departure, we're also faced with our fears, and most of those are based on our limiting thoughts. So we might talk ourselves out. We see this looming crisis, and we think, oh, no, I don't have time to deal with that right now. I'm not smart enough. I'm too old to deal with that. I'm too young. I don't have enough money to respond to this. Whatever. We create all these limitations in our mind about why this particular crisis is just too much to handle. And then we fall into ignoring it and move on. But let's say this is Lord of the Rings, and Frodo says, I'm going for it. I'm going to respond to the crisis. Then we're at step 5, which is called the walk of trials. And this is when our faith is put to the test. And I'm sure you all at some point have had your faith put to the test when you encountered a call to adventure. We realize the inevitability of the journey, and a series of peace can unfold within us if we have faith. And then something happens, which is called inspiration. And inspiration is different than when you set an intention, because inspiration comes from a divine spark within you that gives you the faith to walk through the trials. And I'm going to read some phrases about the differences between inspiration and intention. So with intention, you set your goals, but with inspiration, you find them. With intention, you fight for your goals, but with inspiration, you flow towards them. Intention comes from your willpower, but inspiration comes from God's will and power. Intention needs focused attention, but inspiration needs relaxed meditation. With intention, your aim is survival, but with inspiration, your aim is something much higher. Intention comes from what you lack, but inspiration comes from what you have. You learned how to use intention, but you were born to be inspired. The source of intention is your mind, but the source of inspiration is the soul. Intention makes you efficient, but inspiration makes you spirited. With intention, you're on your own, but with inspiration, you are the whole universe. With intention, you create something for yourself, but with inspiration, you find your real self. Intention is based on what should be, but inspiration is based on what could be. Intention is supported by hope, but inspiration is supported by trust. Intention drives you to what you ought to do, but inspiration shows you what you are meant to do. All intentions are limitations. Only inspiration makes you limitless. Intention means struggle, but inspiration is total surrender. With intention, you reduce everything and everyone as a servant to your goal, but with inspiration, you become the servant yourself. Wrong intentions can come only from the ego, but true intentions always come from inspiration. With intention, you are choosing, but with inspiration, you are chosen. Intention is based on who you think you are, but inspiration is based on who you really are. Intention comes from what you already know. Only inspiration can uncover totally new things within yourself. Intention puts you behind the driving wheel, but with inspiration, you are driven. So I hope you guys are seeing the difference in your own life between being inspired and setting intentions with goals. Intention comes from you, but inspiration comes from beyond you. Intention is something you do, but with inspiration, something is done to you. With intention, you want control, but with inspiration, you allow yourself to be controlled. So, with intention, you are in tension, but in spirit, you are inspired. So, if you've ever been unhappy because you were inspired to do something, maybe you chose to do something different instead. They become divided inside because their intention is different from their inspiration. So the message is let your inspiration become your intention. That's step 5, the faith. Okay, 6, the approach. Step 6. We're halfway through the journey, guys. We have 12 steps to go. 12 in total, 6 more. So in step 6, the hero of the journey has to face the reasons why he or she started out in the journey to begin with. You may begin to question yourself, what in the heck was I thinking? You may feel a sense of anxiety. You're halfway through, right? You still need stamina. You realize you have so much more to go. You see the top of the mountain and you realize you're only halfway. But at the same time, as you're questioning and maybe being dissatisfied with yourself, you yearn to accept the journey and yourself. And you have to face yourself. And most of all, at this stage of the game, you need to find purpose. Why am I doing this? Otherwise, you will feel unfulfilled, and it will just be like a mountain climb with no purpose. So think about the last goal that you set. And if you achieved it and you felt unfulfilled at the end, you probably lacked a purpose for doing it. Purpose is the why we do something. What is it going to bring back to us? How is it going to make me a better person? What am I going to learn from this? So when you answer that call to adventure, you want to get in touch with that purpose. So halfway through, you don't peter out and turn back. Purpose is a spiritual thing in terms of what are you going to add back to your soul that's permanent. Whether you're climbing Mount Everest or walking across country, whatever you're doing, what is the purpose? What will you add back to your soul? And that will help you get to the end of your journey. Because what's coming next is the crisis. This is step 7. We call it the crisis or the climax. These were some of the people you might have recognized from Lord of the Rings, right? And this is where the hero of the journey, which is you, faces a greater challenge. Sometimes, as in the Lord of the Rings, it could mean life or death. Physical death, but sometimes it can mean emotional pain so deeply that we die emotionally or mentally. And for most of us, one of the greatest fears that we have is death. And so this fear of death that resides in most of us is actually what keeps us from living life fully. And so when we avoid death, the more we deny it, the greater it grows, the fear of death. It causes us to devalue life because we think that it will never end, that we'll never die. And then we end up wasting our life thinking, oh, I'll take it for granted, I've got another day. We lose motivation to fulfill our dreams because we procrastinate. And it causes us to fear life. And then we avoid the adventures and we stay in the comfort zone because of the fear. And ultimately, if we really work down those fears, subconsciously, we all have this fear of death. So one of the things we do is we try to make ourselves immortal by doing what I call immortality projects. One of those is having children for the sake of carrying on our name. Maybe we want our children to have the same profession as we did, right? Or maybe we want a hospital wing named after us so that we think we're going to live on forever. We do all these things, right, to avoid death, so to speak. But what happens when we embrace our own mortality or death? It sounds morbid and depressing, but the opposite is actually true. Death can be the greatest motivator to living your life fully. You'll start procrastinating less, waking up thinking, what if today is my last day? Who am I going to call? What am I going to do that I've always wanted to do? You recognize you're a spiritual being having a physical experience, that this is only temporary and it was never meant to last forever. And then you become motivated by your higher self rather than physical goals, like more money or something like that. You gain greater perspective about what's important, not physical things, but spiritual things. And you really get in touch with your life purpose, which is, why am I here to begin with? I came here for a mission, and I only have a certain amount of time, so let's get to it. Your ego becomes less powerful because the ego is the part of ourselves that kind of wants to keep us in fear mode, all right? Being grateful for our lives is easier when we realize that it could end at any moment, right? When something is finite, we appreciate it more. It goes up in value, right? There's only so much of this limited edition. It's going to be expensive, but if we know it's limitless, well, we'll wait to buy it. It has no value, right? It's limitless. Your relationships improve when you realize you may never see a certain person again, and you want to make the most of the relationships that you do have. We let go of grudges and so forth. So in this crisis, we have to face the fact that we physically might die, or we might have a spiritual rebirth, right? We might allow parts of ourselves to die and new ones to come in, right? We're in a process of spiritual rebirth. And in this process, we visit the shadow, right? And what is the shadow part? The shadow is the part of ourselves that holds all those fears, anxieties, and so forth that we repress. And one of those is most likely the fear of death, right, that we hold in our psyche. And so that shadow is about letting that shadow come out, let the fears come out, and look at them in the face, right? Look at them in the face, and then they become less powerful over us. I wanted to read this quote by Steve Jobs that he said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, pride, fear of embarrassment or failure, these things will just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what's truly important. Remembering that you're going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. So why not take that call to adventure? Because there is a reward, and that's step 8. So we didn't do this journey thinking there's no reward. Remember, the purpose is, what am I going to add to myself? How am I going to change and grow? And so during this process, we're like the butterfly. We're the caterpillar that turns into the chrysalis that eventually is going to turn into the butterfly. And this is about transformation. And to understand, we each transform differently. We all have our way, our method of transformation. And if you look at your astrology chart, the planet Pluto is what we call an evolutionary planet because it will describe to a T how a particular person, lifetime after lifetime, has caused crises in order to jumpstart them into transformation. So it's really fascinating when I looked at some charts of people to understand what their transformation was all about. And Pluto likes to shake things up in your life. So whenever you've had crisis, turmoil, you can bet that Pluto is the one activating this on your chart. And the goal of Pluto is to transform us. So it's not going to mess around. and make it easy for us. So here's some examples. Gandhi had the planet Pluto in Taurus in the 7th house. So what that means is the 7th house is the house of the public, our friends and our enemies. So basically his transformation took place on center stage, right? And we know that was true. His whole life, he was with people constantly, and he embraced humanity. And he used both his enemies as well as his allies to cause transformation, and that is the 7th house. The interesting thing about the sign of Taurus is that it's all about physical things in the body. And I was thinking about that and the fact that he used to fast. Remember, he would starve himself or fast until people would end the violence or do something that he wanted to happen. And Taurus is about the physical body. So he really used that quite well. Henry Ford had Pluto in his 9th house in the sign of Pisces. And the 9th house is the house of spirituality. And I thought, well, that's interesting. This guy was a big CEO, car maker. How did he transform spiritually? So if you research him, you'll see some pretty interesting things. And he had a lot of quotes about reincarnation. And I'm just going to read you some of the things that he said, which showed that he was a deeply spiritual person at heart. And he says, I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26 years old. Religion offered nothing to the point. Even work could not give me the complete satisfaction. Work is futile if we cannot utilize the experience we collect in one lifetime to the next. Genius is experience. Some think to see that it is a gift or talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives. I, you, we will reincarnate over and over. We live many lives and store up much experience. Some are older souls and others not so, and so they know more. So that's how I understood his Pluto. It was in the sign of Pisces, so he actually was quite intuitive. Pisces is the water sign of intuition, so it made me think that a lot of the ideas he got for car manufacturing probably came from his imagination, just like Einstein used to say, imagination is more important than knowledge. Okay, so step 9 is the result. So we're not quite done, but we've been through some deep challenges by this point, right? And as a result of answering that call, going through the crisis, going through that transformation, shedding parts of ourselves, transforming. With Pluto, you always will lose something. You need to let go of something. Old parts of yourself. Sometimes we lose our home, maybe a mudslide. Sometimes we lose a spouse or a best friend, they pass away. And we wonder, why is this being taken from us? Right? So Pluto is often about loss, but if we look at it through spiritual eyes, sometimes we see that we didn't really need that anymore. Maybe we're too attached to it. So I had a good friend who ran a fairly large kind of metaphysical spiritual bookstore in the Chicago area for about 20 years. And she made some bad business deals in trying to expand the space, and she ended up losing the entire store. And it took her years to get over that. But when that happened, the planet Pluto was active in her chart. And one of the realizations that she had was that she was completely losing her identity in her work and in the store. She was becoming the store rather than herself. And she needed to get back in touch with who she was. It was kind of an interesting journey. So sometimes through the loss, we can find something good. So the result, I always teach people that your life purpose is 2 parts. It's about developing and sharing your gifts with the world and working through lessons. And so by step 9, we're really fully embracing our life purpose, which is we've developed some gifts through this challenge. We've learned some lessons when we've had to face that crisis, right? We learned some tools that we could use to move through that. And we're actively using those. And we have something called soul memory, which means that the permanent things that you learn this lifetime will stick with you, with your soul and your subconscious mind, so that the more that you open that door to adventure, you will learn and grow more, and you will add more understanding so that your next lifetime will be easier, and the next one, and the next one. But if you don't open that door, you're going to have to at some point in your next lifetime. So if you do it now, those gifts don't go when you die. They stay with you. They become a permanent part of yourself. When you were born, you had a lot of those gifts in you. They just needed to be sparked, probably because you already developed them. So I look at them as building blocks. Okay, step 10. Now it's going to get really interesting because you think it's going to get easy, but we still have some challenges. The hero is aware of returning to the old world, but as a transformed person. Frodo left the Shire. He had fought battles. He did so many things, but he had to go back to the Shire with all those other people that he used to know. But he's transformed. He's not the same person. And so we're more aware of the different parts of ourselves. We've overcome some shortcomings. But there's tension, right? When the new self goes back to familiar territory. Because what's the temptation? To fall back to who we were before we answered that call to adventure. So how many of you, maybe you went through high school, you got through college, you're away from 4 years away at college, and you moved back home. You couldn't find a job, you moved back home with your parents, and you feel like you're reverting back to that little teenager that used to live there, right? Even though you're transformed through this college experience, you're back home, your parents are calling you by the nickname they did growing up, and you feel like, God, what happened? You start to feel tension, right? So that's a challenge. Now, what also happens is, what about the people that we left behind that are so excited that we're returning, and they expect us to be the same person we were before? They don't want us to change, right? They like the old us, not the new us. And so this can lead to loss of friendships, loss of marriage, many different things, right? Because we grow and change. And if the other people in our life don't want us to, they're like, well, I like the old Susan or the old Sharon. You feel stuck, like, well, but I'm better now, really. I've grown, I've gone through challenges, but they don't care if you're new and improved, right? They want the old you because that's what they're used to. But our nature as souls is to grow. That's the nature of life here, is evolution. Everything is always evolving. We were never meant to stay in a container. And so when people and places want to put us in a container, sometimes the best thing to do is reassure them that it's going to be okay, and we have to let some people go, right? If they won't accept the new people that we've become. Have you ever known somebody that's never moved away from their hometown because of they want to stay the same? Or our parents want us to remain the people that they wanted us to be, not who we wanted to become. So sometimes there's value in moving away from your roots so that you can expand without people trying to put you in a container. Remember the story that I told in the beginning, the parable of the acorn and the oak tree, right? I think that new person that we've become was always inside of us there, lurking beneath the shadows. And it needed an experience or two in order to pull us into that person that we were destined to become. It was always there. And so when people are shocked that we're different, it's like, sometimes we feel like saying, well, it was really always me. It's just stronger now. Or maybe I voice my opinion more now. And that's okay. There's a great astrologer that I studied some of his work, and his name was Jeff Green. And he used to talk about herd mentality. And he did some studies that showed that at any given point in history, at least 75% of the population would always be in a state of the herd mentality, which means they would follow the mainstream, follow the status quo, not question authority, not question what was happening, just go along and do it because everybody else was. Now, if we stay in that herd mentality, it's hard to answer that call to adventure because most people will say, you're crazy. You're going to go do that, right? They don't understand that the door opened for you and you feel this urging inside to go. Maybe it's a homebody that says, well, how could you leave your hometown? That sounds crazy, right? So when I was a junior in high school, I got this wild idea that I wanted to study abroad my senior year of high school. And I became a foreign exchange student in France, and my friend said, you're going to miss your senior year of high school? You're crazy. You're going to miss senior prom, all this stuff. I said, I don't care about any of that. I just feel this urge. I need to go explore something new, and I went. And when I came back, I really only had one friend that I remained friends with because the others, we were just so different directions, but they thought I was crazy. I was supposed to do everything like they were doing, go to the prom and graduate with my class and all that, but I didn't want to. I kind of stepped out of the herd and went a very different route. Now, about 20% of the population moves into what we call the individuated state. And this is when we begin to question authority. We begin to question what all the other sheep are doing and saying, well, that seems a little odd. Why is everybody doing that? We question things, and we begin to listen to our own voice instead of the voice of society. And when we get into that state, when that door opens for an adventure, there's no question. You don't care what society says or the herd says. If it's crazy, great. You're in an individuated state, and your authority is now your own inner voice. It's not somebody else. It's not your parents, your teachers, the government, or anybody else. It's your own voice. And then beyond that, about 5% of the population, if they keep answering those calls to adventure, and they overcome the fear of death, right? Overcome all the fears of the challenges, they enter in that spiritual state where they realize their whole spiritual essence is who they truly are, that they are not a physical being. And so they remove their attention from all physical things, all the physical distractions, and they focus solely on soul growth. Maybe that's the yogis in India, for example. They've renounced possessions and all that, and that's the only thing that matters. So one of the ways that helps us move beyond the herd is the planet Uranus. We all have this planet somewhere on our chart. And this is a planet of individuality. It's where we're each unique. We're all different, right? Like a fingerprint. No two of us are unique, are the same in any way, shape, or form. We've had different past life experiences that make us who we are today. And we have something unique to give to the world. And to really touch on it, you have to look at the planet Uranus in your chart to see what it is. And that is your key to moving out of the herd mentality to your own unique self. So let's look at this here. So I chose Gandhi again because I like the placement of his chart. He has the planet Uranus in Cancer in the 9th house. And the 9th house is the house of spirituality. And so basically it's saying that his unique gift to the world had something to do with spirituality, and the sign of Cancer is about love and nurturing. So the path of his spirituality was the path of love and nurturing for people. Remember, it was peace, no violence, not hurting anybody in any way, shape, or form. And that was a unique thing, right? No violence. Even if they come at us with guns, we'll respond with peace. And that was his message. It was very unique. That was Uranus in the 9th house. Martin Luther King. Now, his unique Uranus placement was in the sign of Leo in the 3rd house. So what that means is his unique gift to the world, the 3rd house is the house of communication. He had a unique way to communicate messages to the world. Every elementary school studies his thing. I have a dream. I mean, that lives on and on. That was back from the 60s, and we can still repeat what he said. So did he have a unique way of communicating? He sure did. He was able to heal barriers between, different races like nobody else could, right? And the way that he communicated started a movement that would change the world. And Leo is the sign of charisma and generosity and love. And so he was charismatic, and he could talk to people across the aisles. So he fully got in touch with Uranus, which allowed him to say, I'm not going to go along with the segregation, which is herd mentality, right? Because other people probably would have said, well, you're black, just sit in the back of the bus and shut up. He was like, no, I'm stepping out, because he had a message, 3rd house, communication. Henry Ford, once again, his Uranus was in the 10th house. Here's his career. The 10th house is the house of career. He had something unique to bring to the world of career, and he did, right? A new way of, it wasn't the first way, automobile, but the way he did it with the automation, all that was new. And he listened to that, and he didn't follow what other people were doing. He did it his way. Some of you may or may not be familiar with Frida Kahlo. She was the famous artist, Mexican artist, married to Diego Rivera. And her Uranus was in Capricorn in the 8th house. So the 8th house is kind of a morbid house. It's about literally physical death and dying, but sometimes it's about spiritual rebirth. And we know that she had that terrible bus accident when she was young. And so she had, after that, I don't know how many series of operations. She was in pain most of her life. She had to wear casts in bed. And so what she did was she tapped her unique understanding of the 8th house, which is death, dying, regeneration, and she put it to work through the paintbrush. All you have to do is flip through some of her pictures, and they're all about people being cut open, dying, and so forth. And I think that she had some kind of unique way of expressing that 8th house. So maybe you'll be inspired to look at your own chart to find Uranus and say, how can I be different? This is my key to exit the herd. Okay, we are almost to the end of the journey. We're in step 11, which is new life. The hero now is back home. Frodo from Lord of the Rings is back in the Shire, the quaint little area with the little houses, right? But he is a different person. And now he needs to share with the villagers his experiences. He has to share who he has become. He is now the wise, brave man of the village, even though he's still relatively young in the movie, right? His experience has given him way beyond his years. Now, astrologically, this step can relate to a universal event, which is called the Saturn return. The first time it happens is at age 29 and a half, and it lasts for like 2 to 3 years. And this is where we go through a process of maturing. So if you think back to those years, 29, 30, 31, we go through major transitions, right? We change careers. Some of us get married. Some get divorced. Some people have children. Some people move to a new area. Those are very formative years where we're maturing, and the idea is to wake up to our life purpose at 29. Sometimes the first profession that we choose is a comfortable one from past experiences. But when we turn 29 and a half, a lot of us are like, well, I don't think this is the career for me. Maybe I just became a teacher because it was comfortable or my parents wanted me to. But what I really want to do is be, I don't know, an astronaut or something like that. And it's time to do that. The second Saturn return hits us at 59 and a half, and it lasts till about age 62. And this is the big maturity phase where we have gone through so many trials and so many calls to adventure by the time we turn 59 and a half, that now we truly are the wise man or woman of the village, and we need to share and teach others. We become the consultant, right? We become, in ancient times, you would have been the elder in the village that all the young people would come to for advice. What do I do about this or that? Because they trusted you had the wisdom built up at that stage. And so we're asked to become responsible for all the knowledge that we have and put it to use to help the most amount of people that we can. It's no longer about making your paycheck. It's about how many people and how much can I change the world with what I know now that I'm in my second Saturn return. Okay, we made it to step 12. We're still alive, right? Part of us died, but we added new parts to ourselves. So we start again. Because life is about growth and change and overcoming our fears, and so we do the journey again. Even though we still might have some of our fears, they're probably less. Because when we think back about all the trials that we went through, we're like, wow, if I could get through that, I could get through anything, right? And so, yeah, we may start the journey again. So, reflect on if there is a door open for you right now that's knocking and asking you to go through it. I hope that tonight's talk gave you the courage or the desire to go through that door. And if there isn't a door that's open for you, maybe that means you need to stir things up and find a door if it isn't presenting itself, because there's always a new adventure, a new area of growth that we can find if we extend ourselves, right? Because it's easy to sit on the couch and sit back, but the rewards, as you have seen, far outnumber the comfort of sitting back on the couch. All right, so if anybody has any questions, or I'll leave that quote back up from Steve Jobs to kind of end it. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll answer those. Yeah. Phil. Yeah, that's a great question. How do we cultivate that inspiration? So I think the easiest way is to say get out of our heads, because intention is something forced. It's something we think about. It's something we think we should do. Whereas inspiration, if we get out of our head into the subconscious space, then we can be open to the intuition, because inspiration comes through intuition. It comes from our spirit guides. It comes from something beyond us. So we have to get out of the way, basically, for that to happen. And sometimes it means following the breadcrumbs of our passions. That's another way to do it. So if you're really passionate about something, the more you follow those breadcrumbs, they will lead to something, right? Also, the morning time is super important for inspiration, because during the however many hours you sleep at night, you're completely letting your conscious mind go, right? And you're completely in the dream state, which is you're in your subconscious mind. So first thing upon awakening, whatever comes to you, the thoughts and so forth, can be sources of inspiration. So a few months back, I was asked to literally go on a trip. And I had told the person, I can't go on that trip. That doesn't make sense right now in my life. And I said no. And I felt a little uneasy about it, but anyway, I let it go. And it was only about 3 days later, I woke up. I went in the bathroom and I looked in the mirror, and the strongest voice said, "You are going on that trip, or you will regret it the rest of your life." Out of nowhere was it. And I was, oh my gosh. So then I called this person. I said, "Yeah, I take it back. I'm going to go on that trip." So the morning time, because we are out of the way, that conscious mind is put out of the way. So if you can create an atmosphere in the morning where you're not jumping out of bed, thinking of work, thinking of all your worries, it's what we call the reverie stage. It's maybe like 5 minutes where you're kind of half in the dream state, half awake. And magical things happen there because you're being inspired all night. We don't remember it all. So those are 3 things. And then the 4th thing, if you can begin to interpret your dreams, a lot of times you'll receive messages that are inspiring, right? Because during the dream state, you're completely open. And so your subconscious is talking to you through symbols. And not only dream symbols, but we have what are called waking symbols, right? Things that we see, little breadcrumbs, and we think, oh, that's kind of odd. What does that mean? So, for example, after my dad loved cardinals, and he passed away a few years ago, and so now every time my mom or we see a cardinal around the house, we think that's him. It's a sign. So there's different signs. So I was driving with a friend a little while ago, and we were asking for guidance about something, and we're on the freeway, and we look to the side, and we see Mennonites in a horse and buggy. And we're like, oh my God. And it wasn't one. Then we looked, there were 3 behind them. I've never seen them on the side going down the freeway. I mean, on the side strip. And we took that as a huge waking sign, waking symbol, because it had meaning for us about something. So the waking symbols are there all the time if you ask for them. So start your day and ask your spirit guides, say, show me a message, something big, right? So it'll really get my attention. And that sure did when I saw men. I've never seen them on the freeway. So yeah, does that answer your question? Okay. Oh, if you make it that right. So what age is that? So let's see. We're talking, yeah, so let's say 60 plus 30, you're talking like 90, 89, 90, right? I know, yeah, we all should plan to make it that far. So I would say that's where your mortality is so obvious to you at that age that you completely release all physical things and desires and kind of half live in that level of subconscious. Like if you think about yogis in India, where, you look at them sometimes and they're like not even present in their body, right? Because they're on some other state. Or did you ever read Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda? Okay, so he used to say that one of the things his master taught him was how to be at various places at one time. So he could be sitting here giving a lecture, but his attention could also be on his home back in India or different places. So that you've mastered the physical by the age of 90. If you make it that far, you've figured out how to live in your physical body, and right? Now it's time to really master more of the spiritual abilities. Yeah. Well, they probably won't make it to 90 if all they do is complain and focus on it. Because the more you focus on the problems, oh, my aching bones, whatever, the more you're going to feel it. So it's not to pretend it doesn't exist, but to address it and figure out, well, what's the root source of this, right? And so we always say that thought is cause, right? You can have 15 people that smoke cigarettes, but only one of them gets lung cancer. So was it the cigarettes that caused the lung cancer, or was it something else? So there's some thought form, which is beyond the physical, that causes our physical condition. Of course, things can add to it, right? Like toxins and so forth. So, they still are identifying too much with the physical and thinking the problem is physical in nature as opposed to spiritual. So there's a series right now on Netflix about the octogenarians. It's really good. I just started watching it, and he finds, it's called the Blue Zones, and there's 5 that he identifies throughout the world. This guy is amazing that did it. He won bicycle championships when he was in his 20s and did all these amazing things, and he wanted to figure out towards, what makes people live to be 90 and 100. And so he found these 5 blue zones, and he went to study the cultures in these groups of people that were living into their 90s and 100s in good health. I got in the first series where he's in this Okinawa, Japan, and they don't have a lot of aches and pains. So I recommend watching that and noticing what is the mentality of the people in those cultures, because something is going on mentally that's allowing them to live healthy and not in pain and happy at 90. So that, you can still exist that way, right? But inwardly, they probably weren't really happy because all those possessions were weighing them down, right? They really weren't free because the possessions had possession over them, literally, because they couldn't let them go. So I would say, like, oh, so that's purposeful. Yeah, and some people just hoard stuff because, but if it has a purpose, then that's different. And yeah, and that goes back to, what I was saying about purpose is if you have a purpose for what you're doing, it's completely different, and she's thinking, oh, we got to preserve history. That's different than I can't let go of this possession because blah, 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 and it's, can't have people over to your house because there's so much stuff there, you become entrapped by the possessions, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, yeah, she was half in the spiritual world and half in the physical. It seems like slowly withdrawing from the senses. Yeah, that's cool. It's kind of a spiritual place too, San Miguel de Allende. Yeah, so she was in the right place too. I love it. Awesome. Any other comments? All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming out tonight, and hope you explore your astrology charts and see your Pluto and your Uranus, and take those calls to action.